You know those hats that say "Make America Great Again"? The Trump campaign slogan from 2016 and probably again this year? That's basically the slogan of American exceptionalism. So when we talk about America as an exceptional country, we mean it both in the sense that it's not like all other countries, but we also mean it in the way that it's better than all other countries. And that was an assumption that went all the way back to the beginning and the founding of the country, this idea that America was a particularly unique and great country. So what made America great? America was great in part because shortly after the founding, as opportunities grew for white Americans to develop their wealth by moving west, which they did at the expense of Native Americans and on the backs of African Americans, there was a tremendous amount of upward mobility for the average white person, particularly the average white man. As the government grew and education became more available to more people, broad-based public education has always been an aspect of American society, and that too made America exceptional. The access to land and property ownership obviously favored those people who already had the resources to buy those things. But certainly, America was a place where you could buy land and you could buy property, you could buy a house. If you think about the American dream, it's a house, it's land, it's all those things. America is, relatively speaking, a democratic country. People can express what they want in the voting booth. They have individual rights. We go back to the Declaration for that. It's also a highly developed country. The technology infrastructure and the development of the country has always been ahead of other countries because we industrialized later. We had more opportunity to be on the forefront of those sorts of things. There was religious freedom here, which meant a lot. If you were, for example, a Russian Jew who had been persecuted, this was a country that allowed you the freedom to practice your religion without persecution. Same was true with Catholics, for example, from Ireland. And of course, the Constitution protected those rights. So when you look at the sources that you studied last night, you'll notice it goes back to the city on a hill, right? This idea, we'll talk more about what that is in class, but this idea that the Puritans believed that everybody in the world was looking to them as a sort of moral example. So we were built on the foundation of a morally superior country. They really believed that. That was backed up by the Declaration, which was saying essentially we are superior because we guarantee rights to all these people. And again, you can laugh that off, but it was meant earnestly at the time. Again, we celebrate Jefferson in this way. We've looked at this before, but going back to the celebration of Jefferson as this greatness of American values, which is greater than other countries. At the same time that Jefferson was writing, we also have a guy named Thomas Paine, a famous pamphleteer, who talks about beginning the world over again. We've talked about the tabula rasa, or remaking the world in a new image, in the perfected image, the vision of the founders. And Thomas Paine was hugely influential in spreading that idea, right? This new birthday of the world and model of American greatness. As we move into the 1830s, as America was moving westward, the idea that Tocqueville, who was a French aristocrat who came here to study prisons, interestingly enough, and he was more struck by the fact that Americans were so democratic, that people really saw each other as equals and saw each other as part of a collective community. Of course, Tocqueville spent his time in the North, so he was looking at a white male public society. He wasn't looking at women. He did not see as much of the institution of slavery, which existed in the South. So that's not part of his view, and it's not really part of American exceptionalism, obviously. As westward movement began to become the major theme in the 19th century, along came this idea of manifest destiny, right? That we were destined to bring all of these rights and all of this technology and all of this greatness across the country. So if you look at this painting, on the right side, you see light. On the left side, you see darkness, and the light is sweeping away the darkness. I would have you look at this more carefully and think about all the things on the right side which represent progress in American exceptionalism, and all the things on the left side which represent the obstacles to that progress. That gives you a really good idea of what American exceptionalism is in a picture. There obviously was exceptionalism in this idea that Lincoln talks about, as even though we went to war over the right for liberty, this whole idea of a new birth of freedom, that the history of America is the expansion of freedom. In the Civil War, this time to African Americans who were able to vote and able to be represented after the war was over. This was seen as an enormous progress at the time. This idea that we were the only country that had a civil war to end the institution of slavery was another idea that America was an exceptionalist nation. So we take this idea and we spread it abroad. We go to fight in Cuba in 1898 against the Spanish to bring liberty to the Cubans. We go to Europe in World War I to bring liberty and freedom and democracy to the Europeans. We fight against fascism and against Hitler and against the Japanese and against the forces of evil, right, in World War II. We do it again in Vietnam. This idea that Americans bring good things, and fighting against communism is a big piece of this. So we see modern examples of this in Iraq and Afghanistan too. In the modern period, in the 1980s, there was a president named Ronald Reagan who was a Republican and a conservative who viewed America in glowing terms and felt like the way to bring ourselves back as a country after some of the divisions in the 60s and a lost war in Vietnam in the 70s and an oil crisis in the 70s, he said, no, let's go back and emphasize what makes us great again. And so this idea of making America great again was really the idea that Reagan had, this idea of new freedom, new greatness. And so again, very much interested in exceptionalism as an idea. So I'm going to ask you these questions to answer these questions. But as you do so, I want you to think about, there's truth to American exceptionalism, but there's also mythology. And I want you to think about to what extent it's true and to what extent it's just a projection of what we'd like to be. I want you to think about the things that American exceptionalism ignores. And I also want you to think about the types of people that would just think American exceptionalism is a huge crock. And if you think about all those things, you'll be in good shape, and we'll look at the other side of this next time.